The smell of a new hospital is distinct. It isn't just bleach and floor wax. It's the sharp, metallic scent of expensive mistakes erased by industrial cleaners. I adjusted my ID badge, feeling the hard plastic edge dig into my sternum. This was supposed to be the clean slate. The protocol was simple. Head down, chart up, survive the residency without casualties. The elevator chimed, a cheerful synthetic B-flat that lied about what was coming. The doors slid open to the pediatrics floor, revealing a glass-walled office directly across the hall. The nameplate caught the fluorescent light before I could look away. Dr. Eliana Stone, department head. My blood pressure bottomed out. The air left the hallway. It wasn't a fresh start. It was an ambush. The pediatric wing was designed to soothe terrors I hadn't felt since Memphis. Murals of humpback whales swam across the nursing station walls, their painted eyes wide and calming, masking the reality of high-stakes medicine happening behind the closed doors. I walked the perimeter, my heels clicking a rhythm that felt too loud for 7 in the morning. I was reviewing the patient census, building my fortress of data, when the air shifted. It wasn't a sound. It was a change in barometric pressure. Eliana didn't walk. She cut through the space. The wreck I remembered from our last shift in Memphis was gone. In her place stood a woman polished to a terrifying shine. Her lab coat was tailored, her hair pulled back in a knot so severe it looked painful, exposing the line of a neck I had once spent too much time staring at. She stopped 3 feet from me. The distance was professional. The energy was kinetic. "Dr. Losi," she said. Her voice was lower than I remembered, stripped of the panic that defined our last conversation. "You're late." "I'm 3 minutes early," I countered, tapping my watch. "You're late for the last 3 years," she corrected, turning to the gaggle of terrified residents trailing her like ducklings. "Listen up. This is Dr. Mary Losi. She's rigid, obsessed with protocol, and entirely humorless. She is also the only person in this building who actually checks my math. Do not disappoint her." It was a compliment wrapped in barbed wire. I didn't smile. I just fell into step beside her as we started rounds. The dynamic reasserted itself instantly, a muscle memory I thought had atrophied. We stopped at bed 4, a 6-year-old with complex respiratory distress. I reached for the tablet, pulling up the blood gas analysis and the overnight vitals. "Oxygen saturation is fluctuating," I stated, keeping my eyes on the screen. "The data suggests we need to adjust the ventilator settings and run a new panel before we consider extubation." Eliana didn't look at the screen. She bypassed the data entirely, sliding the partition curtain back to look at the boy. She placed a hand on his chest, her fingers splayed wide, feeling the rise and fall of his ribs. It was a violation of my process. You don't guess with lungs. You measure. "The numbers are lagging," Eliana said, her eyes closed for a fraction of a second. "Feel the flutter in the intercostal spaces. He's fighting the machine, Mary. The chart says he's stable. His body says he's drowning in air." "The chart is objective," I argued, stepping closer. "If you extubate based on a vibe and his airway collapses, that's on us. And if we leave him on because you're in love with a spreadsheet, we scar his lungs." She moved her hand, and for a split second, her knuckles grazed the back of my wrist. The contact was accidental, dry, and clinical, yet it sent a shockwave straight up my arm that had nothing to do with medicine. It was the static electricity of a night 3 years ago where we lost everything, except the terrifying realization that we worked perfectly together. I pulled my hand back, clutching the tablet like a shield. "Check the blood gas again," I said, my voice tight. "I don't need to," she replied, opening her eyes. They were dark, amused, and entirely too perceptive. "But you do. Go ahead, prove me right." I hated that she knew the outcome before the lab tech even arrived. The tension in the room wasn't just professional rivalry. It was the heavy, suffocating weight of unfinished business. She wasn't just my boss. She was the only person who knew exactly what I was capable of. The shift was only an hour old, but the game had already begun. Memphis isn't a city to me anymore. It's a diagnosis. It's the shorthand for a specific kind of failure that tastes like copper and adrenaline. I sat in the break room, staring at the steam rising from a styrofoam cup, letting the memory autopsy itself in my head. We were residents then, fueled by ego and caffeine, convinced we were gods in scrubs. The patient was a preemie, 26 weeks, fading fast. I wanted to wait for the attending, to follow the hierarchy, to stabilize the vitals before risking the procedure. Eliana wanted to cut. She wanted to bypass the protocol because she felt the clock running out in her hands. We hesitated. We spent 30 seconds arguing over the ethics of intervention while the heart rate dropped. That silence, the gap between my caution and her instinct, is where we lost him. It wasn't incompetence. It was a collision of risk tolerances that left a crater we were both still standing in. The door swung open, dragging me back to the present. Eliana walked in, not for coffee, but for combat. She leaned against the counter, crossing her arms over her chest, the fabric of her scrub top pulling tight. She watched me for a long moment, her gaze dissecting my posture, my untouched lunch, the way my hand tightened around the cup. "Toby's asthma," she said, skipping the pleasantries. "I'm putting him on the high-dose methylprednisolone protocol. We need to blast the inflammation before his airway remodels." I set the cup down, the liquid rippling. "Absolutely not. His history shows adrenal suppression from previous steroid bursts. You hit him with that dose, you risk an adrenal crisis that kills him faster than the asthma. We titrate. We use the localized inhalants, and we wait." "Waiting is passive," she shot back, pushing off the counter to invade my personal space. She stopped at the edge of the table, looming over me. "You're doing it again, Mary. Hiding behind gradual increments because you're afraid to make the big move. You treat the chart, Losi. I treat the pulse. I can feel the restriction in his chest. He doesn't have time for your titration. And I can read the endocrinology consult you ignored," I countered, standing up. The chair scraped loudly against the linoleum, a harsh sound that matched the sudden spike in my heart rate. We were nose to nose now, or as close as we could be without violating HR policy. "My logic isn't fear. It's physiology. If you crash his cortisol levels because you want to play hero, that's malpractice. I'm not letting you turn this department into a casino just because you get a rush from the gamble." Her eyes narrowed, but the anger I expected didn't materialize. Instead, a slow, dark amusement curled the corner of her mouth. It was a look that felt like a physical touch, heavy and appraising. She didn't back down. She leaned in closer, dropping her voice to a register that vibrated in my chest. "You're so certain," she murmured, her eyes dropping to my mouth before snapping back to my gaze. "It's intoxicating, really, the way you cling to your evidence like it's a holy text." "I'm right," I said, my voice steady despite the heat rising in my neck. "And you know it." "I do," she admitted, the concession shocking me into silence. "I know about the adrenal risks. I read your paper on pediatric adrenal insufficiency in the Journal of Endocrinology last month. Paragraph 4 was a bit derivative, but your conclusion on steroid tapering was elegant, ruthlessly logical." My breath hitched. "You read my paper?" "I read everything you write, Mary," she said, the admission landing with the weight of a confession. "I've been tracking your publication record for 3 years. You think it's a coincidence you're here? You think HR just pulled your resume out of a pile?" The air in the room seemed to vanish. "You requested me. I required you," she corrected, stepping back, the distance suddenly feeling colder than the proximity. "I have a department full of yes-men who are terrified of my reputation. They let me run red lights because they're scared to tell me to stop. I needed a break. I needed the one person arrogant enough to tell me I'm wrong to my face." She paused at the door, looking back with a terrifying mix of challenge and hunger. "Don't make me regret it. Fix Toby's chart. Do it your way. But if he crashes, Losi, I'm coming for you." She left the room, leaving the door swinging in her wake. I sank back into the chair, my hands trembling, not from fear, but from the sudden electric realization that I wasn't just an employee here. I was a hand-picked adversary. She hadn't hired a colleague. She had curated a rival because she missed the friction. And God help me, I had missed it too. Hospitals change when the sun goes down. The frantic, chaotic energy of the day shift bleeds out through the automatic doors, replaced by a heavy, rhythmic stillness that feels almost submarine. The fluorescent lights in the hallway dimmed to a low-wattage hum, and the cheerful murals of ocean life took on a darker, more surreal quality in the shadows. The noise floor dropped, leaving only the synchronized beeping of cardiac monitors and the periodic hiss of ventilators, a mechanical choir singing the song of survival. I was still in the office, trapped in the glass box that Eliana and I were forced to share. It was midnight. My shift had technically ended hours ago, but the paperwork was a fortress I refused to leave undefended. The silence between us wasn't empty. It was dense, pressurized, like the air before a thunderstorm breaks. Eliana was at her desk, the glow of 3 monitors illuminating the sharp planes of her face. She had finally stopped moving. The constant, frenetic motion that defined her leadership style had settled into a weary stillness. She stood up, the sudden movement making me flinch internally, though I kept my eyes glued to the discharge summary I was editing. I heard the pour of liquid, the distinct smell of burnt beans filling the small room. A moment later, a paper cup slid into my peripheral vision. "Black," she said, her voice rough with fatigue. "Like battery acid. Just how you like it." I looked up. She was leaning against the edge of my desk, invading my workspace with a casual arrogance that made my pulse jump. I took the cup. It was hot against my palms, a grounding sensation. "I didn't think you remembered." "I remember everything, Mary. That's the problem." She took a sip from her own cup, her eyes closing briefly as the caffeine hit her system. When she opened them, the department head mask had slipped. The terrifyingly composed dictator was gone, replaced by a woman who looked exhausted and profoundly lonely. "Do you think I like fighting you on every chart?" "I think you live for it," I answered honestly. "It's the only time you look like you're having fun." She laughed, a low, dry sound. "Maybe. Or maybe it's just relief. Everyone else treats me like I'm made of glass or dynamite. You treat me like a problem to be solved. It's grounding." She turned her head, looking through the glass wall toward the NICU bay. In the dim light, the isolettes glowed like incubators for stars. "It's quiet. I hate it when it's quiet. It gives you too much time to think about the ones who aren't going to walk out of here." "That's why we have protocols," I said softly. "So we don't have to think. We just do." "That's why you have protocols," she corrected, turning back to face me. "It's unnerving, Losi. It's almost arrogant how still you are. Even when the alarms are screaming and the attending is freezing up, you never shake. Not once." "It's not arrogance," I whispered, unable to look away from her mouth. "It's control." "Is it?" She stayed where she was, leaning against my desk, but the air shifted. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're holding on so tight you're about to snap. And I keep wondering what it would look like if you finally just let go. The intimacy of the observation was sharper than a scalpel. She wasn't talking about medicine anymore. She was talking about the tension that had been coiling between us for 3 years, the unspoken thing that made every argument feel like foreplay. I opened my mouth to answer, to defend myself, or maybe to surrender, but the universe intervened. The silence shattered. The red strobe above the door began to flash, accompanied by the piercing, rhythmic shriek of the code alarm. "Code blue," the overhead page announced, emotionless and loud. "NICU, Bay 2. The moment evaporated. Eliana's eyes snapped from mine, the exhaustion vanishing instantly as the adrenaline took over. She was moving before the announcement finished, and I was right behind her, the coffee forgotten, the tension shelved, both of us running toward the chaos. The NICU bay was a chaotic storm of noise. Alarms screamed, a high-pitched, rhythmic assault designed to trigger panic. But as I crossed the threshold, the noise didn't register as sound. It registered as raw data. The infant in the warmer was a neonate, barely 28 weeks, skin mottled gray, chest rising unevenly. "Tension pneumothorax," Eliana barked, never looking up. She was already gloving, her movements violent with efficiency. Left side, he's crashing. I need a thoracostomy, now. I stepped past the frozen residents, hip-checking an intern out of the way. I didn't need instructions. I knew Eliana's rhythm better than my own heartbeat. By the time she snapped the latex gloves over her wrists, I had the tray open. I slapped the betadine swab into her hand before she could ask. "Drape," she commanded. "Already down," I said, smoothing the sterile blue field over the tiny, heaving chest. The world outside the sterile field ceased to exist. The nurses shouting, the wail of monitors, the frantic parents being ushered out. It all faded into a dull roar. There was only the circle of light, the tiny patch of skin, and Eliana's hands. This was our paradox. In the office, we were matter and antimatter, exploding on contact. Here, over an open tray with a life in the balance, we were a single organism. Scalpel. I placed the handle firmly into her palm, orienting it exactly how she liked, blade down. She made the incision, a precise line between the ribs. A hiss of escaping air signaled we were right, but the stats were still tanking. The monitor screamed its descent. I watched the numbers tumble. 60, 55, 50. Time didn't just slow down. It bent around us. I saw the sweat beading on her forehead, the microscopic tremor in her jaw that no one else would notice. Hemostat. I handed it over. She performed the blunt dissection, fluid and aggressive. I anticipated the tube, stripping the packaging and having the tip ready the microsecond she widened the opening. There was no please, no hesitation, just execution. "Sats are rising," I called out, voice cutting the noise. 70, 80, 85. "Suture," she demanded. I handed the driver. She threw the stitch, a brutal loop to hold the tube. We both exhaled at the exact same moment. It was a synchronized release, air leaving our lungs in unison as the baby's color shifted from gray to pink. The monitor settled into a steady beep. 10 minutes later, we stood at the scrub sink. The adrenaline was crashing, leaving a raw, shaky emptiness. The water ran hot, the harsh smell of chlorhexidine soap filling the alcove. I stared at the drain, trying to slow my pulse. Eliana wasn't washing. She leaned against the metal basin, water running unheated, watching me. I felt her eyes on my face, heavy and unblinking. "We shouldn't be able to do that," she said, voice low under the rushing water. I scrubbed harder. "It's a standard procedure. We know the steps." "Don't insult me." She reached out, shutting off my faucet. The silence was deafening. Water dripped from my hands, echoing against steel. That wasn't protocol. That was telepathy. I didn't have to speak. You were inside my head before I formed the thought. I turned to face her. She was too close. Her face was flushed, a lock of hair escaping her severe bun to curl against her damp temple. She looked wild, dangerous, and terrifyingly beautiful. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. "We work well together," I admitted, breathless. Medically, she repeated, testing the word like a lie. She stepped closer, trapping me against the sink. She didn't touch me, but her presence was a weight on my chest. You know what scares me? It's not that we fight. It's that when the blood is on the floor, you fit against my frantic edges like a puzzle piece. It's seamless. It's addictive. She leaned in, her voice a husky whisper scraping my nerves. And God, Lucy, watching you take command, anticipating my hands, it's almost enough to make me want to create emergencies just to feel it again. She held my gaze, pupils dilated, hunger mirroring my own, before she turned, drying her hands with a rough snap of paper towels, walking away and leaving me dripping wet, burning alive. The adrenaline crash is a physical thing. It leaves you hollowed out, vibrating with a phantom energy that has nowhere to go but inward. I couldn't go back to the glass office. I couldn't sit 4 feet away from her and pretend that the last 10 minutes hadn't rewritten the laws of physics. I needed air that didn't smell of recycled fear and antiseptic soap. So I went up. The roof is the only place where the city wind drowns out the ventilation hum. It was dawn, that gray, indeterminate hour where the night shift bleeds into the day. The sky was a bruised purple, the clouds heavy and low. Eliana was already there. Of course she was. She was leaning against the concrete railing, looking out over the skyline, her lab coat abandoned on a bench. The wind whipped loose strands of dark hair across her face. She looked like a statue carved from exhaustion and granite. I walked to the railing, leaving 6 feet of safety between us. The city below was waking up, oblivious to the life we had just wrestled back from the edge. "You signed the transfer request," I said to the horizon. "I saw the timestamp in the HR file. You approved it 3 minutes after it hit the server. You didn't even interview me." "I didn't need to interview you," Eliana replied, her voice snatched by the wind. She turned, resting her elbows on the rough concrete. "I spent 3 years building this department, Mary. I have the best equipment, the highest budget, and a team of residents who are absolutely terrified of me. They agree with everything I say. If I told them to prescribe leeches, they'd ask for the jar size." She kicked at a loose pebble, watching it skitter across the tar paper. "It's dangerous. A department head who never hears the word no is a liability. I needed someone who wouldn't just nod. I needed someone who would force me to show my work." "Because of what happened," I said. The words hung heavy between us, heavier than the humidity. Eliana went still. She didn't echo me. She just stared at the horizon, her jaw working. I turned to face her. The morning light was harsh, exposing the tension in her jaw and the dark circles under her eyes. "We never talked about it. After the funeral, we just stopped. I thought you blamed me for hesitating, for demanding the labs while the sepsis was winning. Is that the story you told yourself?" She shook her head, a bitter, crooked smile touching her lips. "Mary, you didn't hesitate. You were thorough. I was the one who wanted to gamble. We lost that boy because the pathology was faster than both of us, not because you checked a box." I felt like an anchor, I admitted, the confession scraping my throat. "Every time you wanted to run, I was pulling you back. I thought you hated me for it. That's why I left. I couldn't handle the look in your eyes every time I cited protocol. I thought it was disgust." Eliana pushed off the railing but didn't close the distance. Instead, she turned her back to the view, leaning her hips against the concrete, arms crossed tight over her chest like armor. She looked at her shoes, then at the door. Anywhere but at me. "You misread the look," she said, her voice dropping, stripped of its usual command. I waited. The wind whipped a strand of hair across her mouth. She didn't brush it away. "You were the only resident who didn't look at me like a god or a monster," she said to the ground. "You looked at me like a peer. You were the only one who could keep up with my pace, and half the time, you were faster." She finally looked up, and the unguarded, raw panic in her eyes hit me harder than any shout. Her hand twitched at her side, reaching out before she forced it back into a fist. "I wasn't angry that you demanded protocols. I was paralyzed because I realized I needed you to keep me from burning the place down. And I don't know how to need anyone." It shifted the ground beneath us. The rivalry wasn't about competence. It was about dependency. "I thought I was just a roadblock," I whispered. "A roadblock stops you," Eliana murmured, her gaze dropping to my mouth, heavy and deliberate. "You didn't stop me. You focused me. It's intoxicating." She took a half step closer, invading my space with a confidence that made my breath hitch. "Watching you work back there? Dismantling a crisis with nothing but logic and steady hands? It's not just impressive, Mary. It's a turn-on. It always has been." The words landed like a physical touch. The air was freezing, but I was burning up. The tension coiled in my chest snapped, releasing something dangerous. It wasn't just rivalry anymore. "So," I managed, my voice unsteady. "You brought me here to fight with me?" "I brought you here," she said, eyes locking onto mine, "because fighting with you is the only time I feel completely awake." She held my gaze for a heartbeat longer, letting the confession settle, then stepped back as the stairwell door creaked open for the morning custodial crew. But the damage, or the healing, was already done. The elephant in the room wasn't a ghost anymore. It was a spark, and it was catching fire. The truce we negotiated on the rooftop lasted exactly 4 hours before a 10-year-old girl named Sophia shattered it. She arrived via ambulance, presenting with a grand mal seizure that wouldn't break and a temperature spiking to a terrifying 104 degrees. The trauma bay instantly became a storm of controlled chaos. Nurses moved in a blur of blue and yellow gowns, shouting out vitals that refused to stabilize. Her white count was normal, but her blood pressure was tanking. It was a physiological riddle, the kind that kills a patient while you're still trying to read the clues. I stood at the foot of the bed, my brain locking into protocol mode. The path was clear. "We need a lumbar puncture," I commanded, my voice cutting through the noise. "Rule out meningitis immediately. Get a CT scan before the tap to check for swelling. I want a full toxicology screen and a blood culture." No, the word was a gunshot. I looked up. Eliana was at the head of the bed, her hands stabilizing the girl's seizing frame. She wasn't looking at the monitors. She was looking at a faint, lace-like rash beginning to bloom behind the girl's ear, a detail I had missed in the flurry of data. "Cancel the CT," Eliana barked, her eyes wild and focused. "Start IV acyclovir and high-dose steroids. Now. This is viral encephalitis. If we wait for the scanner, her brain cooks." "You can't treat encephalitis with steroids without a confirmed diagnosis," I snapped, stepping around the bed to confront her. "If it's bacterial meningitis, you'll suppress her immune system and kill her. We need the fluid, Eliana. We need the proof." "We don't have time for your proof, Losi." She slammed a hand down on the rail, startling the residents. "Look at the pattern. Look at the rigidity. I've seen this before. We treat it now or she's brain dead in an hour." "You are guessing," I hissed. "I am not letting you gamble with a child's life based on a hunch." "Out," Eliana said, pointing to the door. "On-call room. Now." She didn't wait for me to agree. She marched out, and I followed, fury radiating off me in waves. We burst into the nearest on-call room, and she kicked the door shut behind us. The lock clicked with a finality that sucked the oxygen out of the tiny, windowless space. "You undermine me in there again, and I will have your badge," she growled, turning on me. She was crowding me, backing me up until my legs hit the edge of the narrow bunk. "You are reckless," I shouted back, throwing my hands up. "You want to bomb her system with drugs based on a rash? You're betting her life on a feeling." "It's not a feeling, it's recognition." She stepped into my space, invading the boundaries I had carefully erected. Her face was inches from mine, her breathing ragged. I hesitated once because I waited for the paper trail. I waited for you to feel safe, and we lost him. I am not losing her to your need for certainty. I am trying to keep us from killing her. I don't need you to be safe, Mary. I need you to jump. Her voice dropped, losing the shout but gaining a terrifying intensity. She placed a hand on the wall next to my head, leaning in. The air between us was suddenly suffocating, thick with anger and a sharp, undeniable desire. "This isn't about the chart anymore. It's about whether you trust my eyes more than you trust a lab result. Do you?" I forced myself to meet her gaze. Her pupils were blown wide, dark pools of adrenaline and certainty. She wasn't manic. She was seeing something I couldn't. In that silence, surrounded by the smell of stale sheets and our own heat, I realized she was right. Not because the math worked, but because I knew her. I knew the way her mind processed patterns that data couldn't catch. "If you're wrong," I whispered, my voice trembling, "we kill her." "I know," Eliana breathed, her gaze dropping to my lips before snapping back to my eyes. "But if I'm right, we save her. Trust the instinct, Mary. Just this once. Jump with me." It went against every fiber of my training. It was dangerous. It was illogical. And looking at her, feeling the heat of her body against mine, I knew I was going to do it. "Do it," I said, the surrender tasting like ash and electricity. Start the meds. We didn't speak as we walked back. We just worked. I ordered the drugs. I held the girl's arm. And 30 minutes later, as the seizure broke and the temperature began to drift down, I watched the monitor stabilize. Eliana slumped against the back wall, exhaling a breath she'd been holding for years. She looked across the room at me, and the look wasn't triumphant. It was raw. It was the look of someone who had just handed me a loaded gun and watched me choose not to fire. The numbers were finally catching up to her gut, but the trust, that was the only metric that mattered. The silence that follows a saved life is heavier than the silence of a lost one. When you lose a patient, the silence is hollow, a vacuum where a person used to be. But when you save one, especially when you pull them back from the ledge with nothing but a hunch and a prayer, the silence is dense. It is packed with the adrenaline that hasn't metabolized yet, the echo of shouted orders, and the terrifying realization of how close the drop really was. We retreated to the office like soldiers leaving a trench. It was 3 a.m. The cafeteria was closed, so we ordered takeout from the only place in the city that delivered to the ER bay at this hour, a questionable Thai place that tasted like grease and salvation. We sat on the floor. The desks felt too formal, too reminiscent of the hierarchy that had almost suffocated us hours earlier. We sat with our backs against the filing cabinets, knees almost touching, picking at cartons of cold pad thai with plastic forks. The department head mask was gone completely now. Eliana had kicked off her shoes. Her hair was coming loose from its severe knot, curling around her temples in the humidity of the room. She didn't look like the terrifying Dr. Stone. She looked like the girl I used to study with until sunrise, the one who drank stale coffee and argued about ethics until her voice went hoarse. "We got lucky," I said, breaking the quiet. I was staring at a noodle hanging off my fork, afraid to look at her. If that had been bacterial. "It wasn't," Eliana said. She wasn't eating. She was holding her carton, staring at the opposite wall. "But you're right. It feels like luck. Every time I make a call like that, Mary, I feel like I'm flipping a coin." I looked at her then. "You never look like you're flipping a coin. You look like you're reading a map the rest of us can't see." "That's the job," she whispered, turning her head to rest it against the cool metal of the cabinet. Her eyes were rimmed with red, dark shadows bruising the skin beneath them. "They pay me to look certain, but God, it's lonely. Standing there, knowing that if I'm wrong, I'm the only one who will carry the weight of the box. It's so loud in my head, Mary, all the time. It's just noise and doubt." It was the most vulnerable thing she had ever said to me. In Memphis, she had been invincible. Or maybe I had just needed her to be. "I didn't leave Memphis because of the patient," I said. The words tumbled out before I could vet them against my internal censor. "I didn't run because we failed." Eliana went very still. She turned her head slowly, her gaze locking onto mine. "Why did you run?" I put the food down. My appetite was gone, replaced by a different kind of hunger that had been gnawing at me for 5 years. I ran because of how it felt to work with you. That intensity, it wasn't sustainable. I felt like I was standing in the center of a fire every time we were in a room together. I knew the protocols, Eliana. I knew the safe routes. But when I was with you, I wanted to burn the map. I took a shaky breath. I left because I was terrified that if I stayed, I would never want to be safe again. The hum of the refrigerator in the corner seemed to roar in the silence. Eliana shifted. She didn't move away. She moved closer. She slid along the floor until our shoulders brushed, a contact that sent a jolt of electricity straight down my spine. "Safety is overrated," she murmured. Her voice was low, a rough velvet that scraped against my nerves. "You think I didn't feel the fire? Mary, I was the one holding the match, but I never wanted to burn alone." She reached out, her hand covering mine where it rested on the floor. Her skin was warm, her fingers calloused and strong. It wasn't a comforting touch. It was a claim. She traced the line of my knuckles with her thumb, a slow, deliberate movement that made my breath hitch. "We're dangerous together," I whispered, watching her hand on mine. "You know that. We feed each other's worst impulses. You make me reckless. I make you, what, hesitant? You make me precise, she corrected, leaning in. Her face was inches from mine now. I could smell the spice of the food and the clean, sharp scent of her soap. You sharpen the blade. That's not dangerous, Mary. That's lethal. And it's exactly what I want. My heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a bird trapped in a cage. Every alarm bell in my head was ringing. This was the department head. This was my superior. This was the woman who had haunted my career for half a decade. The protocol says this is a bad idea, I managed to say, though I didn't pull my hand away. HR would have a field day. The ethics committee would convene a special hearing. Eliana's eyes dropped to my mouth. A slow, wicked smile curved her lips. The kind of smile that precedes a very bad, very good decision. The protocol is boring, she whispered, her thumb pressing into the soft skin of my palm. And I think we both know you're tired of being bored. We have a shift tomorrow, I said, my voice weak, a final crumbling defense. We have rounds at 7. Then we should probably stop talking, she replied, closing the last inch of distance until her forehead rested against mine. She didn't kiss me. She just stayed there, sharing my breath, letting the tension wind tighter and tighter until the air in the room felt solid. Tell me to stop, Mary. Give me the data point that says stop. I opened my mouth to give her the data. I had 1,000 reasons. But looking at her, feeling the heat of her body radiating into mine in the quiet dark of the office, the only data point that mattered was the pulse jumping in her throat. I can't, I breathed. Good, she said. The shift was technically over. The sun was threatening the horizon outside. But in that small, messy office, we sat in the wreckage of our defenses, neither of us willing to be the first to walk away. 2 days later, the universe decided to test the hypothesis. It arrived as a blunt force trauma to the chest. A 7-year-old boy named Leo, brought in after a playground collapse. He was septic, his vitals mirroring the Memphis case. The monitors screamed that discordant rhythm, a high-pitched warning signaling a system in free fall. The smell, betadine, fear, and the metallic tang of a GI bleed was identical. The hospital walls dissolved. I was back in that cramped, underfunded trauma bay in Tennessee. I saw the ghost of the boy we lost overlaying the living one. My hands locked at my sides. The protocol in my head fragmented. I needed the labs. I needed the cultures. I needed the safety net that had failed us before. BP is 60 over PELP, a nurse shouted, her voice rising an octave. He's bottoming out. We're losing the rhythm. I couldn't breathe. The air in the room turned into concrete, pressing against my chest, freezing my lungs. I was watching it happen again. I was watching the math fail. Mary. The voice was sharp, present, and anchored in the now. I blinked, the dual image shattering. Eliana was standing across the gurney. She was looking directly at me, her gaze a physical tether pulling me out of the spiral. He needs a central line and he needs pressors, she said. Her voice was calm, a terrifying counterpoint to the chaos. You don't need the lab slip. The lactate, I stammered, the old fear choking me. If we're wrong, if I miss the vein, we aren't, she cut in. She didn't move to take the kit or play the hero. She held her ground, forcing me to step into mine. Stay here. Stay with me, Losi. You know the math. Look at his perfusion. Look at the rate. Calculate the deficit and fix it. You are the only one in this room with the hands to do this fast enough. She was trusting me to save him. She was handing me the risk and telling me to wield it. Something in my chest snapped from the tension. The oxygen hit like a drug. The room sharpened. The ghost faded. I saw Leo. I saw the vein. I saw the solution. Get the line, Kit, I ordered, my voice dropping into that cold, absolute register that terrified residents. Start norepinephrine. Push fluids wide open. I moved. My hands weren't shaking. I found the landmark by touch, the ultrasound merely a confirmation. I threaded the needle, the wire, the the catheter. It was a dance of millimeters performed on the edge. "Pressure is coming up," Eliana announced. She hadn't looked away from me once. She was the spotter, holding the weight so I could press it. "You have the flow, Mary. Don't stop." I didn't. I secured the sutures with a speed that blurred, my muscle memory overriding the trauma response. We were performing an exorcism. When the line was secured and the boy's color began to shift from gray to pink, the room exhaled. We had done it. We had rewritten the ending. The euphoria that hit me was cleaner than adrenaline. It was redemption. I looked up across the sterile field. Eliana was watching me, her mask pulled down, a fierce, possessive pride burning in her eyes. It was an acknowledgement of partnership in every sense, a silent vow that we would never let the ghosts win again. "Nice work, Dr. Losi," she said, her voice rough with unsaid things. "Good call, Dr. Stone," I replied, my hands finally still. The shift wound down into the mundane rhythm of discharge papers and shift change reports. But the air between us remained charged, vibrating with the energy of what we had just done. We had killed the past. Now we just had to figure out what to do with the future. The administrative tale of a crisis is always longer than the crisis itself. The adrenaline of saving Leo had metabolized into a dull, rhythmic exhaustion that settled deep in my bones. The hospital was quiet, the weekend shift settling into their low-hum routine, leaving the administrative wing largely deserted. We were in Eliana's office, the only illumination coming from the amber pool of her desk lamp and the harsh, grid-like glow of the city skyline through the window. The stack of charts between us was shrinking, one signature at a time. The sound was hypnotic, the scratch of pens against paper, the rustle of pages, the soft exhale of cases closed. It felt domestic in a way that unsettled me. We weren't fighting. We weren't sparring over a diagnosis. We were just two professionals finishing the work, existing in a silence that had finally lost its teeth. I signed the final discharge summary for the week, a routine asthma case, and capped my pen. The click sounded loud in the stillness. "That's the last of them," I said, leaning back in the visitor's chair. The leather creaked, a sound of release. "We survived the week, and nobody died." Eliana didn't look up immediately. She finished her own signature, a sharp, jagged scrawl that looked exactly like her thought process, fast and decisive. She closed the folder, placed it on the finished pile, and then stood up. She walked to the office door. She didn't open it. She turned the deadbolt. The metallic thunk echoed in the room, changing the atmospheric pressure instantly. My heart did a traitorous double tap against my ribs. "Is that protocol?" I asked, my voice attempting a lightness I didn't feel. "That is privacy," Eliana said. She didn't come back to the desk. She leaned against the door, crossing her arms, watching me across the dimly lit room. "If I leave that door unlocked, a resident will walk in here in 3 minutes to ask me about a fluid bolus they should already know how to calculate. And I don't want to talk about fluids, Mary. I want to talk about the merger." "The merger," I repeated, testing the weight of the word. "You and me," she clarified. "This department. The way we run it. The way we run whatever this is." She gestured vaguely between us, indicating the charged air that had been thickening ever since the rooftop. I looked at her. Really looked at her. The fatigue was still there, bruising the skin under her eyes, but the fire was back. She looked solid. Inevitable. "The HR handbook has a section on this," I said, retreating to my baseline. Section 4, paragraph 2. "Relationships between direct reports and department heads are strictly prohibited to prevent conflicts of interest." "I know the handbook, Losi. I wrote the revision last year," she countered, pushing off the door and walking slowly toward me. She moved like a cat, deliberate and dangerous. "But you aren't my subordinate. Not really. You saw the way the team looked at us after the code. They don't see a boss and an employee. They see a binary star system, two masses of equal gravity orbiting a common center." She stopped at the edge of the desk, leaning her hip against it, invading my personal space from above. "I didn't hire you to check my math, Mary. I told you that. But it was a half-truth. I hired you because I was tired of being the only person in the room who understood the language I was speaking. You hired a rival, I whispered. I hired a partner, she corrected. Her voice dropped, becoming that rough velvet texture that scraped pleasantly against my nerves. I've been waiting 5 years for you to catch up. I've been waiting for you to realize that the reason you hated Memphis wasn't because we failed. It was because you were terrified of how good it felt to work with someone who actually challenged you. The truth hit me harder than the memory. She was right. I hadn't run from failure. I had run from the intensity of the connection. I had run because I knew that with her, I would never be safe, but I would always be brilliant. It's a risk, I said, looking up at her. If we do this, if we cross this line, it complicates everything. The rounds, the diagnoses, the hierarchy. If we crash, we take the department down with us. High risk, Eliana agreed, her eyes dark and unflinching. She reached out, her hand hovering over mine on the armrest, heat radiating from her palm. But look at the data, Dr. Losi. Look at the outcomes. When we are in sync, we don't just save patients. We rewrite the odds. We did it with the neonate. We did it with Leo. She lowered her hand, covering mine. Her grip was firm, grounding, an anchor in the storm. We make a terrifying team, Mary, she whispered. I think we owe it to the medicine to see what happens when we stop fighting the pull. I turned my hand over, lacing my fingers through hers. It was a violation of every protocol I held dear, and it was the most logical decision I had ever made. Terrifying, I agreed softly. So, where do we sign? We walked to the parking garage in heavy silence, the automatic doors sliding open to release us into the cool, exhaust-tinged night air. As we reached our cars, parked side by side, Eliana didn't say goodbye. She just reached out, her fingers brushing mine. A brief, electric contact that promised trouble. See you at rounds, she said, a smirk playing on her lips. Don't be late, I replied, smiling. I watched her drive away, realizing that while medicine requires strict protocols to survive, love, like the rarest, most complex diagnosis, requires the courage to improvise and the willingness to jump. If you enjoyed this checkup on tension and release, subscribe for the next shift.